that journey of building or the making of the movie 600 with actually the lifestyle and the sacrifices and what the 600 troops went through. There's a lot of synchronicity in there. You see that, you know, for us to be enjoying the fruits and favors and, you know, all the peace and security and the growth that we're enjoying today, it's very easy to take it for granted if you do not appreciate what people go through in life. And that's some of the things. Those are some of the things that you'll find the youth of today not appreciating, the journey and the sacrifices we must make to be able to be the people who we are, that we are.
Yeah, and you have to put time and put in work, you know, as you said. My next question is really to do with, so we know in terms of what I want to discuss is the authentic portrayal of the 600. In the past, we've had documentaries, you know, made in Rwanda about Rwandans by non-Rwandans that are deliberate in the way they misconstrue these stories. You actually have the big movie from Hollywood, Hotel Rwanda, for instance. We have the BBC's documentary Untold Stories, and they were just not authentic portrayals of the narrative that we've had as a country since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So when you did yours, the representation of the 600 soldiers, based on general public feedback, has really been quite authentic. The portrayal has been really, you know, true to word. What was your process? What did you do different? What did you and Richard Hall do different so that the 600 was really based on Rwandans who watched it, you know, a story where Rwandans watched and said, this is actually a reflection of events that happened. This is our story. So what is it that you did different, and what was the process?
I think Richard Hall has a personal interest in the story. He is married to a Rwandan. He's married to someone who survived the genocide, whose family or relatives were part of the military operations here in Kigali. So he was really vested in the story. And then, so he didn't just come as an outsider, you know, wanting to just tell this, you know, this thrilling story. But on visiting the museum together earlier on, when you just, you know, come to visit Kigali, as two producers, we looked at the story as it was packaged for the first time for most people, for the public. I think the museum had just been opened.
The Museum of Parliament.
Yeah, yes. the Campaign Against Genocide Museum. Yes. And he looked at me and said, looked at everyone else and said, you know what? There has to be a movie made about this. But long story short, we decided to embark on this. And the process from that point on took 18 months, as I said, but for research alone, looking back, it took about 6 to 7 months, just research. But that meant we had to value each and every single story. We had to turn every stone. We had to actually try and corroborate the stories, because that's what I think that might be the experience people are expressing when they go to the movies and saying it's powerful. But I think it might be that that might be one element that worked for us, is that we took time to uncover every story. It was like an investigation to go and find out. So there's an operation they talk about, even at the museum, St. Andre operation. People were rescued there, but can we find some survivors? Do we start by looking for survivors from that area, or do we start by looking for soldiers? It was easier to start with survivors and then maybe even work backwards. At some point, you'd find the stories were coming together. You'd have the story of the cow scene, where the ladies were there together 25 years ago. And there's a story of Theogene, who came to rescue people that same night from the mountains, from Rivero, which was more adjacent to St. Andre Nyamirambo area.
When they refused to open for him.
And that might be St. Paul. Yes.
But even no, they eventually opened. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, they did eventually open. So you just go and you uncover all these stories, and even you yourself, you can't help but be moved, be in awe of what people went through and be grateful that they're here to tell these stories, and that no one will keep these stories, you know, off the records anymore. I think this film came to almost set the record straight.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
to come and set the record straight, because as 25 years go by, you would don't be surprised that we would meet during our research. We'd do pre-interviews, which was another process before the on-camera screening, and screen all these stories. We had gathered about 90 stories, about 50 or 45 RPA soldier stories and rescuee stories, and to look at all this and say, okay, which stories do we go, which ones do we leave? That was a difficult process.
It must have been difficult.
Very difficult.
Yes.
If I tell you that out of 90, 50 of them made it to the on-camera, we thought might build the story we're trying to go for. 50 came in for interviews now on camera. And now during the editing process, we realized we might make a 5-hour film here. Yeah. So let's see. And it's really difficult. I can't imagine now during the editing phase what Richard Hall had to go through to know, what do I take, what do I leave? Exactly. So out of 50, what you see in the final film now, you have about 27.
Yes.
27
almost 30 years.
Stories. So that's just so that maybe we can bring more focus and then think about the next
step, which we'll get
the
to.
next stories,
which we'll definitely get to. And the other question I have is to do with issues to do with trauma. You know, telling these stories, there was an issue, definitely, I'm sure, that came up of trauma revisited, not only for survivors who were telling their stories, of rescuees who were telling their stories, but even you, the film production crew, listening to these stories. How did you deal with the traumatic process of opening old wounds, so to speak, and curating these stories for the general public?
I think fortunate for us is we, on the local side, I was charged with, you know, just making this happen as much as possible with the local crew, with local consultants, people who have experience doing research work in this area or this topic. So we had 3 consultants, and one of them is Paul Richesha, who's also interviewed in the film. Works at the museum, the Genocide Museum Memorial, and he recommended very earlier on that we should consider having a trauma counselor on set every day for the time we're filming.
How long did you take
and that
to
was
film?
really, we took 4 weeks to film. So 2 weeks we used to film civilians or the rescuee stories, then 1 week to do the military stories, and then another week to now re-dramatize all the stories. So our process was, we did not predetermine the scenes, the re-dramatized scenes you watch. So we allowed the documentary to flow organically and as authentically with no manipulation, so that when people watch it, you know, people will accept it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think the fact that you said there was nothing predetermined, for me, it takes me back to that issue of, that's why it was an authentic portrayal. Unlike some of these different stories that are told about Rwanda, there's already a predetermined interpretation of what would have happened. And I don't think there's as rigorous, you know, connection or connectivity with the people who experience these things vis-a-vis the people who are actually telling these stories. Do you want to weigh in, Charles?
I think from the perspective of authenticity, you know, when you look at, even again, you watch it and you listen to the stories and you can see the emotion in the stories. And I really love the fact that you guys kept that stuff in. You know, somebody's telling a story and it becomes so overwhelming that they break down in tears, and it's still kept on screen. And again, they did a very fantastic job in ensuring that they captured the emotion. Obviously, they give the right context around it, so that when the person experiences the emotion, you can feel it with them. You can understand why this person is breaking down. And and again, coming back, I'm pretty much repeating what you said. Because they and I'm glad you shared this with us, because you guys opened it up and said we're not gonna direct this conversation. We're not we're not gonna frame the story a certain way. It allowed for that to flow, and it came out so beautifully.
It was very unexpected for us as well. Like when I tell you, it organically
Very organic.
panned out right before our eyes. I mean, the thing is, all we needed to do actually, the biggest part of this process was to gather the stories, but the stories revealed themselves. Like 25 years later, what you saw on screen was almost like almost a bringing back to memory. Even for the rescuees and the rescuers, people were not so sure. Like, are you sure I'll be able to remember this? That was what would cause some anxiety or worry. You guys might ask us some details we might not be able to recall. But right there in front of the camera, you know, as you saw, emotions flow. You just let it be. Let the story tell itself. Even this person who experienced what they did suddenly realizes, let me just go with it. And that's what you're experiencing in the cinema, is the story is taking control. And that's what made it powerful for us making it, and for the people, audiences, as we see the reactions.
Absolutely.
Annette, just again, from a production point of view, as the stories were unfolding and as you guys were making the movie, considering that you were doing a movie and listening to stories and filming something around a war, isn't there a particular point you felt the urge to say, no, hang on a second, shouldn't it be a bit action-packed? You know, is that a direction we want to take? Especially considering, as I said earlier, that it was a movie around a war. Yeah.
You know, sometimes we had to work within the resources we had. So we quickly realized initially we're not trying to aim for the 25th anniversary or commemoration.
Really? It was not planned?
No, it was not.
It just came into place.
I mean, it then became planned. But initially when we were having this discussion with Richard saying what's feasible, well, within the financial means we can raise, we'll have to do it realistically, and it might take 3 years, 2 years. You know, films actually do take very long to make. And what fast-tracked it for us is, as we discussed the idea and the project with other people, is, you know, it was obvious, like, try and aim for the 25th, you know. But we weren't sure if we're going to have the financial resources to pull that off. Because you fast track, then you fast track the money fundraising process.
Actually, I wanted to ask on that note, if it's not too much to disclose to the public, who are some of the most supportive financial backers, or even just beyond even just financial backing, people who you would want to say, you know what, these people, if it wasn't for these people's help, we would not have been able to pull this off.
Yeah. Finances played a big role to get it here at this time. I mean, the timing just worked out. But to fast track that, Richard had to find the means on his side. And then right now it's a numbers game. It's a distribution conversation to see how, and then can we also just as fast recoup that.
Right. So he put in his own
He
resources.
had to find his own resources quickly. So that was that. So there were 2 phases of financing this, and the big part was the filming part and the editing part. And then the distribution part, I'm just happy or proud to say that we had partners here in Kigali, private sector. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed in this, you know, it's not publicity, but we had...
I mean, it's appreciation.
Yeah, no, it's appreciation. Exactly. So we really appreciated that the Rwanda Film Office came in as a key partner.
The Rwanda Film Office
under RDB, which is new.
I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah, it's new. We probably maybe the first film for them to take this angle of supporting us during a premiere or a launch. So for the launch was pretty costly, but it helped ease the burden financially. We could do it here locally, you know. So then we had Bank of Kigali come in as one big sponsor, and Airtel came in. I think, yeah. So they came in at very critical time. So and then we had other partners. I mean, there's the financial, but there's people who lend the experience, expertise, and skills. You had Clarity with Sonny Kanamugire. We had Illum. They were great. One-stop center, PR and Combs. And with Clarity, they managed the premiere event, which was world class.
Yeah.
Which was world class. Yeah.
You guys came
So
dressed in tuxes and
well, it was more laid back.
Flexibility on that one.
It was laid back.
Oh,
It
no,
was
talking
laid back.
about taxes. Maybe we do Made in Rwanda.
They actually
Which
it
is
was
even
made in
better.
Rwanda.
Yes.
I
And
wish
that's
we
better.
had some
not like the James
photos from
Bond,
it, but it was a made in Rwanda affair as well. Yeah.
So no, I feel like I just wanted to ask maybe a follow-up question, and this is maybe a bit digressing from the conversation a bit, but I think this is maybe maybe we could have a follow-up conversation on this on the square, and I think we did have a conversation around the creative sector, but from your own experience in trying to make this come to life and looking at the various stakeholders that you reached out to, I know there are some people who are in the sector and have talked about they received support on the first project, or they will promise support after a successful first project. Then they try to go into a second project, and it's not as fast, or it's not as it was promised. From your own perspective, what do you think are areas of improvement around supporting the creative sector, especially in film, in making stuff like this happen? Because you guys have helped tell our Rwandan stories authentically. So it's a benefit to not just the individuals involved, but also the country at large. So it's something worth supporting. So in your own opinion, what do you believe can be done a little bit more to support creatives in such?
Yeah, I think creatives, I mean, the various stakeholders around making such projects come to be is we decry lack of support, and it's real, but that's because maybe even when we do have a successful project, for example, to know how to leverage that, to be strategic enough, to have a business model even way before that, I think it helps. Because you could fluke a project,
Exactly.
and then it happens, and you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Yet it could take you in a very good direction.
Yeah.
So I think creatives, again, I think you mentioned this, and personally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have had a business background through accounting and what is you just realize the world we live in is dollars and cents. Francs and francs, a reality, but then there's also so much more at stake. Is our history? Are we responsible enough to tell those stories as well? So I think for me, it's a challenge to myself and to fellow creatives. Is when we look at our projects, sometimes we can be a bit in the clouds, in the zone. But you have to come back and look. So I'm approaching so and so. What is at stake for them? And then this is for me. And then where do the two merge? Yeah. And then keep leveraging on every small step of success you have. But I think there's a way. And I feel with the 600, it might open doors not just for our company, AWise Media, but for many other producers out there. So I'm excited about what will come out of this.
And I want to, also building on that, I just want to ask about, since the movie came out, there's been lots of talk with friends on social media about the 600. Is there going to be a series? Is there going to be a fictionalized version?
We need an action.
I know.
I know it's expensive, but we need an action series.
Yeah.
We need I feel like, okay, I know I'm taking this question away, but allow me to do this, because I really, when I watched them, like, this is big. Sorry, because I was like, there is a way. And I know it's expensive, I know these things are not cheap, but because there are so many stories,
absolutely,
and so many versions, that if you told it, because that you had a few hours and you had to tell the stories as you could, but if it was dramatized and stretched out, you could actually have an action series. Yeah. Over even if you did like in 2 parts, like where you had like maybe a 4 series part 1 and a 4 series part 2, And I was even telling some of them, like, that content is Netflix level kind of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm
So
sure
what's-
where Annette is going to go with this is that you guys don't know what we went through with even just to produce what
I
we
know,
produced.
that's how I can see it on her face.
I know, I know.
But knowing Annette,
bring it.
I'm very sure, I think you're very attuned to what the public wants based on just even the 600. So when there's a big call on what is the next step for the 600, does it end here? Are there plans to dramatize it? Are there plans to stretch out the story? There are very many angles of the story, you know, actually from people before, even just coming into the country, the people coming in on the bus, that on its own is a story. The people in Mulindi,
You see the challenge we had to even decide the angle we would take with this.
But in all fairness, it needs to be expounded on.
We want more,
It-
pretty
and,
much what
I
you
mean, for the
said.
people, exactly, for the people who sacrificed and made these amazing contributions 25 years ago, it can't just be 2 hours. Yeah. So what's the plan?
Especially telling an authentic story. We
Exactly.
want more.
We're putting you on
is
the spot on the square. What's the plan to moving forward with the
To give us
600
more.
Okay, without divulging too much
Yes,
of what's
yes.
coming,
course.
but I think people should expect us to delve into. We're picking out 2 or 3 possible story angles from what we discovered in the process of research, and making that into a big blockbuster action film. But initially, the 600 was supposed to be an action film, purely dramatized. But what happened again, I think you had asked this and we didn't get to that point, but again, resources dictate. And there's time resource, there's financial and people resource. So is our skills market ready to support local big blockbuster action
Charlie can act.
film? Hey, you know, so skills, finances, return on investment. In the end, it becomes a very big business conversation. Unfortunately, even when it comes to something like telling our history. So maybe that's why you'll see in the last 25 years, you don't really see as many productions, because in the end of the day, someone somewhere is thinking, will I recoup, you know, except in this circumstance where there had to be some sacrifices made, so we just get this movie done. But I believe what's happened with the 600, I mean, there's results from the box office, the Rwanda box office.
The Rwanda box office. Yeah, can you share some of those results?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Rwandan
After
box
the-
office
the
did
1 week
very
extension.
well.
And now, I believe our viewers will join me in knowing that we also have a Rwanda box office.
I think now we do. Now it's legitimate.
I think the 600,
film,
the
whatever.
600 ushered it in. If
Oh.
I'm
I
not
mean,
mistaken.
there's been other films, local films, but I think the
think
model and the approach we took
yeah.
was let's really try and explore. Like the story is done, it's told, there's a demand, but then again, how are we going to really also prove
Quantify the-
this market?
Yes.
Because in the end of the day, when I say that it's a dollars and cents conversation, unfortunately, even when it comes to history, there has to be a recoup of some kind. You're looking to say, okay, if this is going to happen in Kigali, this kind of excitement, with this kind of PR around it, to get the people to the cinema. We saw about almost 200 people per night on average for the last 17 days.
Wow.
On
And
average.
tickets were going for what, 7,000?
5K.
5,000. Okay.
I know people are doing the math pretty
Yeah,
quick. We're not rich.
Busy
No,
also, like,
no,
running the numbers through my head.
not really. Yeah, no, it's a long way to recouping. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
reality.
Yes, it must be a drop in
It's
the
a
ocean, yes,
long
yeah.
way. But at the same time, what's exciting is there is a thirst. Because in all, when you look at about 3,000 people who've watched this in 2 weeks, those are the numbers on average.
But just as a quick question,
Yeah.
this is now going back to this conversation on business. I think, what is the opportunity that exists with guys, again I'll repeat, guys like Netflix? Because I know a lot of Netflix has been coming to the continent to look for content. At least they've been going out because, you know, they've expanded their reach in terms of subscription for a lot of foreign subscribers. I know they're also looking to generate content for those subscribers. And so they've got a lot of Nigerian films onto that platform. And I find them entertaining.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, for me, when I looked at it, I'm like, this could become a quote-unquote a series of sorts that can actually be stretched out and actually generate more return in terms of investment.
It could
Just no
even be a
reaction to
once-off.
that, yeah.
It could be a once-off, but that could spark a chain reaction in interest in developing content, either around that topic or various other areas, history, culture, even, you know.
I'm not as optimistic as you may be, and probably Annette will share with us her experience on this. World over, this is probably even worse in Rwanda, that it's very difficult to get soldiers to talk. What was your journey like? Even, you know, to even get a quote from soldiers, for that matter, when you're talking to media on an ordinary story, it's usually a bit difficult. They're a bit cagey. They are always reserved with the way they communicate, and they communicate within a certain very linear structure, and that's how it is almost world over. So when I was reading about this, and I was like, my sister must have gone through a very hard time to actually get all these soldiers to talk.
Well, it was an interesting, I mean, if I can take you to the very beginning, the genesis of this story is that after visiting the museum, I tried, while based here in Richard in LA, we had this conversation. So what's the first step? We want to make a film about the 600. Initially, as I said, it was supposed to be an action dramatized film. But still, you'd still need to go through your research phase. So I tried to do, let me meet Charles. Maybe Charles knows someone who was in the 600. But that quickly failed because I realized what you're saying is that these men and women are in the business of security, and they're not interested in anything else, you know.
Yes,
and maybe we would need to find other ways to legitimize our process so that people feel comfortable with the conversation with a civilian, you know. But I quickly discovered something very interesting. As soon, I tried this informal process, like, introduce us to, you know, we're trying to make a film.
My aunt is head of the movie.
So when that didn't work out, I said, I'm going to legitimize this process.
Yes.
I will write a letter to the minister, that time former minister, James Kabarebe, and see what happens. So I took my legs to MOD, Ministry of Defense, my little, you know, and I wasn't so sure what I was doing. But at some point, after a back and forth, because I wasn't sure, you know, security check, what should I do? And no one is there with me. No one is there to guide me through the whole process to get the letter to where? To the minister's office. How? I had my car envelope, got to
the General Secretariat.
They got me to the Secretariat, exactly, and dropped it off. All I wanted was a cachet that says received. Then in the meantime, I would buy another 2 months before they replied to go and say, look, the process is in process, and here's my submission so that we can do further research. And I was called in 5 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but
I was not ready for that.
But it shows you about the importance of this story.
And the timing.
The
I mean, as I said, there's the ministry is in the business of security.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's a great appreciation for narrative, for saying, you know what, if we don't tell this story, someone else will come and tell the story and tell it the wrong way.
Exactly.
So
Authentic
I think we
portrayal.
all were in understanding of that, and the speed at which we were able to delve into archives, to meet, you know, to get introductions made, and the levels of comfort, you know, in saying, this is our story, let's, go, what else can we do to get you more access? It was much easier than I expected.
But that's great. And just before we go to our Twitter feed and start talking, start reading the tweets from our social media feed, if you could just very briefly tell us about AY's Media and Nano Studios. These are your companies, company, sub-company, parent company, and so forth and so on. And what role you see your companies or your work playing a role in the future of the film industry in Rwanda and the region?
And the region,
and the world,
and the continent,
and the continent, and the
no. Just briefly, Airways Media started that 8 years ago when there was literally no one else to employ. Someone specifically trained in motion picture production.
That was you, just you.
There was me, and then maybe like two other people.
Yes,
I don't know.
Yes.
So I tried to figure this out. But in the last 8 years, I realized one constraint is that if a film you do in 18 months, you're highly dependent on collaborations, various collaborations. And when you work as a freelancer and you have your own registration there at RDB and whatnot, you need to have a place where you will consistently produce serious content, have your four walls. And I realized we can't do this whole freelancing thing in coffee shops for the rest of our career. Now, you want to make serious things, make serious investments. So, and I realized I can't put all my money in this one bus I'm taking and have empty seats. Let's have people on the bus and let's go as Nano Studio. So that's how the initiative, a subsidiary for AWISE Media, Nano Studios, was created as a hub, as a one-stop space
for
filmmakers, film and video creators, where they can come and get a lot of their resource needs sorted, as well as mine. So 600, Nano Studios was the home to 600 for the last 18 months.
Oh,
yeah.
That's fantastic. I'd like to take us to a Twitter feed. Our first tweet is from Richard. And Richard says that, congratulations, Annette. Now, African filmmakers often have difficulty accessing African audiences who prefer Western content, and Rwanda is no exception. Do you reckon the success of the 600 has set precedents for brighter days ahead with more government support and funding?
I think 600, we'll walk this journey together. I think people will uncover what we uncover together. So we've seen with the box office, I mean, for a 2-week.
I really like it when you say they're on the box office.
Yeah, it's serious.
Yes.
It's serious business.
Yes.
So you didn't give us the numbers though.
Ephraim.
Yeah. No, but I'm thinking, you know, from the frankly speaking, I look at it from this perspective, right?
But just first, very quickly, in terms of the numbers that Ephraim keeps on harking back to, what?
And he's a potential investor, so you need to give him
so
a
numbers,
straight
not
response
how much were the returns on this, but how many seats were in the cinema? Like, would you have an idea of how many people came through?
I mean, that's what I was saying. I think I mentioned it, but maybe in passing. We had a cinema attendance of more than 3,000 people in the last 2 weeks.
3,000 people in 2 weeks.
On average, about almost 200 people per night.
Yeah. For 17 nights.
For 17 nights.
I think, Ephraim, we'll take the other, delve into numbers offline.
But what I'm saying is that for someone to be able to invest in a project like this, and a documentary is really low cost. But to still recoup this, we really have to also come up with a business plan or a model where we say it's great that people can watch this while they're watching it. And then how are we able to invest in the next project when we get the recoupments from this? So this is a buzz we needed to create for almost international, you know, we're working around the PR to leverage what's happening in Rwanda to say there's a need. And then we're going to go to the region, the continent. We're looking at Southern Africa. Really, we're talking to people who are interested. We got a call from someone in Zimbabwe saying, can we do a road show of the film?
Oh, wow.
From Harare to Gweru to Bulawayo.
Wow.
And then the conversation went into say, let's go Botswana and the region and Namibia and whatnot. I think you quickly discover that there is potential for Africans to listen to answer Richard's question.
Yes.
Yeah, Africans are interested in African stories. Just look at the attendance here locally. The cinema folks say it's equivalent to the turnout for Black Panther in the first 2 weeks, or Avengers.
Wow.
Yeah, so we just have to guarantee we give our audiences that experience. as they say in Kinyarwanda, without kusondekaing them, but
yeah. But just also very quickly, is there a
Authenticity.
plan to take this on a national level? I mean, I know you can't really screen it more than you did for purposes of entering it into festival circuits and so forth and so on. But is there a plan to have this? And I know it was aired on RBA just once on Rwanda television. But are there plans to have like sort of roadshows where you take this around the whole country, like for Rwandans, a story by Rwandans for Rwandans?
Yeah. That has been the plan. It's still the plan. The reason why we're focused on doing a 2-week cinema release, and then after this, we have to put it in the hands of a distributor, a global distributor who's got reach, and then within that reach to be able to now renegotiate the Rwandan license and bring it back. So with the international distribution, that person would assume the risk. In case this film gets tampered with, the risk of it being distributed informally, it's better it's in the hands of someone who will assume that risk. So we do it for our people. For the 2 weeks that we could, do this, it was our honor to do that, but quickly put it in the hands of a distributor that will now manage the whole process and bring it back.
And bring it back.
Yeah.
Okay. Our other tweet for tonight is from Caroline, and Caroline actually echoes, Charles, what you were saying earlier on. She says, soldiers anywhere in the world are reluctant to talk. This may well be the first film that is true about what actually happened in 1994 from the context of those who are there narrating their own experiences. Go watch it. Yeah, so I think it answers you. She talks about, well, if there were any questions being asked, how did you get the military to be part of it and open up?
Yeah, and open up.
Because, I mean, I think these are even some tactics you don't want in the public. Military tactics and
no. I think time is what it is, the timing of this film. It's 25 years later. You have the risk of someone else, again, coming to tell your own story. I remember the one particular veteran, RPA veteran, that is in the film, and he said this himself even in the film. It got a bit emotional for all of us. And on the way to pick him up before the interview, he had initially declined doing this on camera. Richard said, your story is very valuable. We will haze your face, so it's fine. So we pick him up, do the whole routine, get him to set. And on the way driving to set, he says, I told him, I understand that you do not absolutely want your face on camera, but it's just one of those things. It's a comfort thing, like comfort levels. Who not everyone does this, Diana.
Yes.
So I completely understood that. But halfway through, he said, but I'm going to do it.
Oh, wow.
I need to do it. I have to do it for the sake of future generations, so they really know what happened here. So, and he might have well given them one of the most powerful testimonies, in the film, and we value that, and we, there was questions about culture, like, should we allow this emotion to flow through? But again, timing.
It's very un-Rwandan to do that.
And
but
I think that's what
I know.
And that's what
people.
It's powerful, and I'm glad that as we share this film and we got consensus on what how to handle stories. At what point do you cut the emotion, or at how much do you stretch and allow the viewer, the person, to connect with this person's story? I'm glad we made the decisions that you finally see in the film, but we allowed it to flow.
And it's very organic.
It
keep on saying. Our last tweet for this evening, before we close tonight's show, is from Joseline, and Joseline says, "This movie made me understand more that sacrifice is the key to success. We should never take what we have for granted. There are people who fought for us to have a country and a home. There's now a duty to protect what we have and work hard to achieve more." Personally, when I was watching the film, I felt very militant. And I think I told you this.
You did, yeah.
I felt militant, not to fight, but to serve. I looked at my life and I felt, what am I really doing compared to these people? I feel like it's a drop in the ocean. I need to do more. I need to really apply myself even more.
The film
get out of my
challenges people.
Completely challenges you in your own personal space. But I really felt like serving more, and I totally get what Joseline is talking about, sacrifice and what have you.
And this is something that's the kind of feedback we are getting.
Yes.
It's what we went through making it. Is you ask yourself, I think I was not ready for this. I was not ready for this. And so seeing people reacting this way, I think you look at the power of cinema to really impact people. Yes, there's the entertainment part of film and cinema, but we sit. 25 years is not so long. It's long and then it's not so long. And then unfortunately people forget. And I think this film literally came to remind us all just what has been handed to us. It's almost, you look at it as a relay race and someone passes you the baton. And if you don't look at them and really look, you can miss it, you can, that split second and lose the race. So I think we're in a race, and this film came at the right time, in my opinion, to remind us so that we can go into the next 25 years, with the same momentum. Yeah.
Yes, Ephraim.
I think there's a tweet that we didn't read, but the person has asked, where can someone watch?
Oh, yes.
600 film now that it's not showing at the cinema.
At
Netflix in the next 6 months.
Like next week.
So the distribution plan, we hope that by the end of the next 2 months or so, that we will have an announcement for everyone. Again, I think the film came and we had one plan, and now you're looking at the demand, and you're thinking, okay, we need a broader strategy to really satisfy everyone's, demand and where they are geographically.
Yes.
How fast can a distributor come in? Because sometimes when you have a Western distributor who doesn't understand this story, then the search could take longer. So how then do we quickly disseminate the film? Because doors are, people are knocking at our doors. There's an Eritrean curator who called us who has a, I don't know if it's an exhibition, a facility in Washington, D.C., and you have the Zimbabweans and you have different people coming in from Nigeria. And the ideal is to, again, you keep saying Netflix, we're eyeing that, but an online platform where everyone can just access it. So we'll be making an announcement soon.
The reason I keep saying Netflix is because of Netflix pay, from what I've heard, for content. Netflix seems to be the best.
It depends on the negotiations. It depends on at what point you enter with your story. Like, is it Lionheart? And every film you see or series has a different pricing. Yeah. So if it's a Netflix original, they put in everything, and it's the millions you hear out there. If they're buying exclusivity to have it only on Netflix and not distributed elsewhere, that's some recoupment. Again, at the same time, you don't know what percentage of your initial investment. So it's a numbers game. But
and this is, Ephraim is clearly a numbers guy.
She's also a numbers lady.
We will have a conversation about those numbers offline.
Yeah, unfortunately, we come to the end of our show. I'd like to thank you, Annette, so much for gracing our invitation. We were supposed to have had this conversation last week, but it was cancelled. I'd like to thank our viewers for being patient and staying with us to have it tonight, this week. Annette Uize, co-executive producer of the 600 film, thank you for attending the square, and wishing you all the best with everything we've spoken about, the distribution and going forward with this amazing, amazing documentary film.
You too.
Ephraim and Charles, always a pleasure having you on board.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and to our viewers, thank you for joining us. To our partners, I would like to thank Bourbon Coffee as well as Uzi Collections. Have a good night and see you again next week.